What up, Ange?
What up, Paul?
What's going on?
Not much, buddy.
What are we talking about today?
Let's talk about gluten.
Gluten. Cool. What about it?
Well, I feel like, it's kind of a hot topic. It's been a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some people make the choice to go gluten-free because it makes them feel better. Some people make the choice because they have to. But I feel like it's a question we get asked a lot. Like, what are our thoughts on gluten? So
Sure. Yeah. And what are our thoughts on gluten? And I think specifically people come to us like, is this a viable option for weight loss?
yes.
And
If I go gluten-free, will that help me lose weight?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
There's a lot of different,
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but the short answer is no.
Right. Like taking gluten out isn't going to be the magic pill you're looking for.
No,
basically,
it's not.
for weight loss. So,
But that being said, we can talk like there's potential benefits, right, for gluten, and I think more than that, I think there's bigger lessons in terms of like learning about food sensitivities.
right.
You know what I mean? That extrapolate well beyond gluten because there's other common culprits, for food sensitivities like dairy or whatever. And then there's some that's just specific to each individual. Like you can learn what foods your body likes best. And I think if you understand, the difference between an allergy and a sensitivity, you understand how to test to see if you are indeed sensitive to something, you can begin to optimize and find the foods that make you feel the best. And I mean, that's a big part of our strategy anyways, finding the U plan, right?
Right, what makes you feel best, right.
So I mean, the long answer on the gluten is it's certainly not a weight loss pill or weight loss shortcut. You know what I mean? It's not going to do that for you. But
what you could see is if you figure out which foods you're sensitive to, you might see some water weight come off the scale. And I think that's a big one for people to understand too, is they might start a diet plan and maybe gluten's not a part of it. Maybe dairy's not a part of it, maybe sugar, and they see those drops on the scale and they immediately think they're losing body fat or losing weight, because they took those quote-unquote foods out.
Right.
But that's what we're going to touch on. We're going to touch on food sensitivities and how that can materialize on the scale, possibly as water weight, a fluctuation up and down. So I think that's good to understand too.
Cool. Well, I mean, let's start here with the difference between allergies and sensitivities.
Okay, break it down for us.
Well, I mean, gluten allergy, or I guess if you would call it that, like an actual medical condition, it's called celiac disease, and it's an autoimmune response. It's an aggressive autoimmune response when you eat gluten.
Right.
So it causes a massive amount of inflammation, and your own immune system begins attacking your cells in your digestive tract. It just goes haywire, basically.
Right.
Would be the long story short. And so when people say like, oh, I'm allergic to gluten, but like I'm going to eat this pizza and I'll just pay for it tomorrow, like I don't think you understand. You're not allergic to gluten.
Right.
It's not a joking matter for those people who if you have celiac disease and you have gluten, like you get crushed by it for days. And so that's sort of the big difference between an allergy and a sensitivity, or like in this case, celiac disease. Celiac disease is a medical condition that your doctor can tell you about and will tell you like this is detrimental to your health to have this food. Whereas a sensitivity is going to be like, it's a spectrum, right? So on one edge of the spectrum is an allergy. The medical doctor can detect it. On the other side of the spectrum is a slight sensitivity, and that's a little bit trickier to kind of tease out and find out if that's the case for you.
Right.
You following? You with me?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
I think it's good to break it down for people, right?
Yeah.
Because you do hear a lot in conversations when you're out to eat with someone, when you're whatever at a party, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm allergic to gluten," and then it's a real thing, right? You have to be very careful if you would serve that person gluten, but most of the time, people know that they have some type of maybe inflammatory response, whether it's they get bloated from it, they get sinus issues, but like you said, it's not detrimental to their health. It's not an allergy.
Right.
So it's just something they're sensitive to that their body doesn't prefer maybe.
Yes. And so food sensitivities sort of live on a spectrum. You know what I mean? You can have a let's just call it 1 to 10, right? Where like celiac's 10 for gluten, right?
It's bad.
It's the allergy, it's the 10. peanut allergies are, can be at the 10, right? Most tree nut allergies can, whereas the, sensitivity is, could be anywhere from like 1 to 7,
right.
Let's call it, right? And so with something, like a dairy intolerance, right? Which is sort of what I have. I know that if I eat certain kinds of dairy, I have a pretty acute response to it. I'm stuffy almost instantly.
It's immediate for you, right?
Yeah.
You're waking, and I can say from, being his wife, that I kind of know when he has dairy if we're, going to bed, and you start snoring a lot that night, right? Like you can't breathe. So it is pretty quick for you.
So it's a pretty strong sensitivity.
Right.
I have other lower level sensitivities too, like cruciferous vegetables.
Well, that's mine, right? Like I didn't know before until we've kind of experienced with taking things in and out of our diet that broccoli and cauliflower, which I love broccoli, bloats me immediately, right?
Yeah.
And that's a big one. Or nightshades for people, right? Your onions, your tomatoes, bell peppers. People don't know it until they start to play around with taking things in and out. So,
And so with the lower level sensitivities, it's a good thing to know. Okay, so for example, like when I removed dairy from my diet, I felt a million times better because I stopped snoring.
Yes.
Therefore, I slept better. Therefore, I had a bunch of energy. I used to literally drink casein protein every night before bed, and I literally had to take a decongestant, and until I was like, "This is stupid. I got to figure this out." Right now, cruciferous vegetables for me, different story. So this is broccoli, cauliflower, that sort of stuff. Very, very low level sensitivity. The only reason I know it is because I diligently track my weight. And I knew that I removed them completely from my diet. And then I added them back in and was, every other constant in my diet was the same. The calories were the same. Most of my staple foods were the same. In fact, where I had added it back in is I had done steamed cauliflower and then mashed it up with sweet potatoes so that I could get more volume for fewer calories in my sweet potatoes.
Right.
Right. And then what happened is I did end up gaining that week several pounds, I think like 2 or 3 pounds on the scale. I didn't feel any different. I don't even feel like I looked any different per se.
You could just see that fluctuation on the scale.
I could just see the fluctuation on the scale. Low level inflammatory response. Took it out. All the other factors remain the same, and boom. Now that's a low level sensitivity.
Right. And mine was similar to that, right?
I feel like yours is more aggressive.
It's a little more aggressive, where it almost, if you're a female listening, it's like, and you've had a baby, it almost, for me, I would have it, and then 30 minutes later, it almost looked like I was like 4 months pregnant.
Yeah.
Right? Where the bloating was so intense, or almost like a premenstrual cycle type of bloating. And that is uncomfortable, right? To feel your stomach that hard and expand that big from a vegetable, right? And in your head, you're like, that can't be the case. Like, I'm eating healthy, like vegetables are good for me, but it had a response on my body. And again, similar to you, I didn't know that until I had taken it out and started to add things back in. And so that's just a vegetable I kind of keep off the table most of the time now, because I don't like to feel that bloating, uncomfortable feeling where my pants just feel like I need to take them off right away.
So that's a couple things to say about that. If we're just kind of figuring out like what we're talking about now is the spectrum of sensitivities and allergies, that's sort of middle of the road, maybe a little bit past the middle of the road, like it's pretty aggressive, right? You're not going to die. You're not going to go into anaphylactic shock.
If someone serves me broccoli at the restaurant, I'm going to be okay.
Right, yeah, right. You don't have to put a red flag on the waiter's order, right, that there's an allergy or anything like that. But at the same time, like, you do feel a response immediately. And so, what's cool is she knows that.
Yeah.
Right? And so she can just choose not to eat it. What's also cool is that you're not missing out on much with cruciferous vegetables. Where it's like when people can't have gluten, I'm like, damn, that's in everything. You're missing out a lot. That sucks.
Right. You can't have broccoli. That is upsetting.
That's not the worst thing. But now that we've defined sort of that scale of sensitivities, I think a concept that doesn't get talked about enough is having the cumulative effect of several
That's
low-level
what I was
sensitivities.
going to say, right?
Yeah, so it's like
where they all start to mask one another because you
they
don't.
mask one another and they add to each other.
Yeah.
So for example, for me, I had that low-level sensitivity to the cauliflower, right? And then I had, lower-ish. So my dairy thing is like kind of specific more like to the casein side of it.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? But the whey protein also doesn't do well with me, but it's not as aggressive. It's not as acute. Right. So that's two things right there. And then I don't really know what else.
And what would casein be in? Just for people that are listening.
Yeah. So it's just, casein is just a different kind of dairy. So it's like cottage cheese. I was doing it as a specific protein because it's slower digesting. So it's like if you eat it or drink the shake before you go to bed, you have building blocks of muscle.
But it might keep you fuller longer because it's
fuller,
slower
longer.
digesting. Right.
No, yeah. So basically cottage cheese.
And I think
would be the
Greek
main
yogurt
one.
was another.
Greek yogurt, yeah. And then whey protein is another form of dairy that's a little bit different. Whey protein powder.
Most people would be
Yeah,
familiar with whey protein if you are doing some type of working out. It's a faster digesting.
And so whey protein for me, it didn't like affect. I didn't feel the effects of it. Right, immediately, like I did with the other one. Just like I didn't feel the effects of the cauliflower. Just like let's just say gluten is a thing for me. I don't know that it is, but let's just say that it is. I don't feel the effects of it immediately. Right. But what happens is I have these 3 low-level sensitivities that are all adding up, and all of a sudden, I'm having an inflammatory response to all these foods because it's like a little bit of inflammation from the dairy, a little bit from the gluten, a little bit from the, what else did I just say? The broccoli, which, I don't eat, but whatever. It adds up.
Right.
And so all of a sudden I'm like, kind of feeling like shit. And I don't know, I don't know what the culprit is. You know what I mean? Because I've got too many things going on. And so what we recommend people do, if you want to find out if you're sensitive to something or not, is basically an elimination diet.
Right. You got to strip it down.
So you strip it down to the bare essentials, right? And a lot of times too, I guess I should say a lot of culprits for these low level sensitivities is fillers, oils, food colorings. So
artificial sweeteners.
Which
that was a big one for me.
Which is sad, yeah.
I really like diet soda.
So I mean, there's a lot of these things, and so when you're trying to tease out, the culprits, what you want to do is really, we've all got our staple foods anyway.
Yeah.
We've got our 7 to 10 foods that we eat regularly.
Right.
And so what you want to do is stick to those as much as you can for like probably 2 weeks. 3 is better, but 2 is good. And then no restaurants. During that 3 weeks, no packaged food, which is going to have fillers in it. Like, you have to be a little bit more diligent. You have to do a little bit more homework, just so that you're
managing it on your end at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
you're managing all the variables
because
on your end.
Unfortunately, at a restaurant, you don't know what kind of fillers and oils and stuff they're using. So what you're saying is you need to be as clear as possible as to what you're consuming to know if you're actually going to have one of these sensitivities.
Exactly. And so that gives you a baseline. Right? A baseline for how you're feeling, a baseline for how those staples are reacting with you, and a baseline for what you're feeling like without the culprit or the suspected culprits in.
Right.
And then from there, what you want to do is add them back in one at a time after you have the baseline. And so if, let's just say it's, let's just say gluten's the thing, right? I wouldn't just go crazy with like Wonder Bread, right? Because that's got a bunch of fillers. It's got some oils in it, along with the gluten. I would go with the purest form of, wheat that I could, right? So like just like a, what's it called? Like a simple ingredient bread. There's some breads that what's it called? The Roman meal. It's got like 4 ingredients.
Yep.
Like, stuff like that where it's like water, yeast, wheat, right? So there's as few ingredients as possible, and you add those foods back in, and you add them in a specific amount on a daily basis. So it's not just like one piece of bread, right? It would be enough to impact your system, but not so much to overload your system, right?
Yeah.
So maybe a sandwich at lunch, if we're on the gluten thing, but I'm just giving you a sample amount, like a sandwich at lunch, and then some sort of similar form at dinner.
Okay.
right? And you do that without adding in any multiple culprits for several weeks. No, I'm sorry, for 1 week. Just do it for 1 week.
Yeah.
Right, so you've done the baseline for several weeks, 2 to 3. Then you add the suspected culprit in for 1 week. You're tracking your weight to see if there's water fluctuation. You're tracking your macros, I think is also important to do. So like, I guess that's a side topic about how people lose weight when they cut gluten, just because they simply just cut out all carbs at that point. But,
right.
To track your macros, track all the variables that you can. Sleep, exercise, make sure that it's all close enough to your normal rhythm, and then see how you feel after a week. And you'll have a really good idea of how that food affects you and if you're sensitive to it. If you consume it every single day for a week and there's no change from baseline, I think you're good to go, right?
Yeah, and you're also looking for the obvious responses, right? Like, do you have bloating? Are you congested from it? Are you having digestion issues, right? So if you take it out for a good amount of time, like you said, 2 to 3 weeks, and then you start to add it back in, and we say one food at a time because you need to know which one it is. So that's why you were stressing, like, if you're going to choose a bread, make sure it's really few ingredients so you know that it could be like the gluten that's actually causing the inflammatory response. But pay attention to your body. If you get a headache, right? If you feel flu-like symptoms, like you're going to acne, right? Like all these big ones that people don't think about. Some people even get like little mini rashes. And so it's being then more in tune with what's going on with your body. A lot of us aren't until we start to pull out some of these big like inflammatory foods. And I mean, we could probably just touch on some other big ones that, we know, like nuts are a huge one for people, right? Legumes, nuts, obviously dairy's a big one. Gluten's a big one. Eggs are a big one for people.
Eggs are a big one.
I didn't know eggs for myself until we did this process on ourselves.
Well, eggs are tricky too because a lot of egg allergies are actually just, to the yolk.
Yeah.
So some people who are quote unquote allergic to eggs can eat egg whites, but then also it's tricky because eggs are something that a lot of people eat out. Right, like you go to a restaurant for. So it's like, which was part of our issue, which is like, hey, we eliminated eggs, and then we went back to our favorite spot, Patty's, which is just like a breakfast joint or whatever, and the eggs did not sit well. But it's like,
with
hey,
either one of us,
was it the eggs or was it the oils
they
grill?
kicked it? Right.
You know what I mean? So then we had to back it out and redo it with eggs at home.
Right, and now when we go out, we just get pancakes. Because then
that's
we don't.
That's just easier because I know I don't have a gluten allergy.
Me too.
Like I know that the egg, there's minimal egg in there.
Yeah,
and it's just like that. And I bring my own Walden Farms to it.
Like kind of off topic. It's interesting with eggs for me. I actually get more bloating and like crazy digestion issues from the whole egg. Probably maybe the yolk, but I'm fine with egg whites in the carton. They have no response on me. And maybe because they're pasteurized, I'm not sure. But it's interesting till you start playing around with this stuff to figure out, how you actually feel. And it's also amazing that for so long, I was doing that, having all these different things that were kind of just covering up each other's symptoms that I was feeling, and was frustrated because for me, it like materialized as more belly fat. Like I would just see all that inflammation there.
Actually fat?
No.
Let's clarify that.
That's what I'm getting to that, right? Where I would see it in my face, like my sinuses just look puffy, but I didn't realize it really was just a water weight response to these foods until we actually went through this elimination diet, and it's not scary. Like you're just eating from a list of foods that make you feel good. Like that's the coolest thing about it. But I didn't know that until all of a sudden I started to get those foods out, and then the water weight just kind of fell off my body. Like recently I was dealing with it, right? Where I had really gotten back on the sweetener train. Artificial sweeteners, from energy drinks to creamers to diet sodas. What else was that? Sugar-free jellos. I was out of control, but I was in a cut, so I was eating less calories than, I normally do. And I was looking for ways just to kind of creep in some extra food without the calories. And sure enough, like, how bloated was I? Like it was on the scale, because I track my weight daily too. It was like 4 to 7 pounds on the scale. And I clearly knew at the amount that I was eating, I wasn't gaining body fat. But wow, was I bloated, and I couldn't go to the bathroom regularly. Sure enough, I cut out the sweeteners, and it was 48 hours later. And I was back to normal. And so gluten.
And I think a lot of this sounds super scary. If you've never done any sort of nutrition program before, it can sound like, man, well, they're just crazy, right? Like the Lyngsos are crazy, like they have spreadsheets and stuff. And it's like, well, like yes and no, right? It's not this super hard discipline. It becomes fun because you're learning about yourself and you're learning about what makes you feel good. And it's like, basically, if you're eating foods that are kind of dragging you down, it's just like banging your head against a wall and expecting your headache to go away.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, it becomes really fun when you're like, oh, all I had to do was, make this one little, like for me, it was like, removing that shake at night, that casein powder. And all of a sudden, I stop snoring. I get restorative sleep. My energy goes to the roof. I'm like, well, cool.
I was sleeping better too then.
And Angie was sleeping better too, right?
I didn't have to use my earplugs anymore.
That was super easy. And so it becomes fun. And it's like...
Right, because people do ask us if we enjoy this stuff. And we're like, well, we didn't always. Like, this hasn't been us forever, but it is fun.
I would say this, but we didn't always do it. But since I've always enjoyed whatever I've done.
Yes.
Because if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so whether I've enjoyed the results of it or I've always enjoyed the process more than anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's a little bit of a mindset shift. Just saying like, hey, like I'm doing this, I'm committing to this process and I'm enjoying it. Like, it just makes you rely less on willpower.
Yeah. You don't have to suffer when you do it. You don't have to
suffer.
look at it as I can't, right? Like I can't have these foods. These foods are restricted.
Right.
They're off limits. It's like, why don't you...
Or pass fail.
Yeah.
I screwed up my diet. Like, no, if you just look at it as like, oh, this is just a process. I'm learning about myself.
It's an experiment. And maybe this experiment works for you or maybe it doesn't. And you're just trying. Like you said, there is no pass fail with it. And it just kind of becomes a different way of looking at it. Like when we did this whole elimination diet, we ate from a list of foods. And a lot of them were our staple foods anyway. But most people, you present it to them and they freak out because they're like, but I can't have this. It doesn't have that on the list. We're like, shift it. Why don't you look at it as like, I'm going to eat from that list and I'm going to feel freaking amazing, right? Like my energy is going to go through the roof. I'll be able to keep up with my kids. I won't wake up tired because I'm going to be sleeping better. Like if you can just think about the benefits and what it's going to do. And then it works for you, it does. If not, no biggie.
Yeah, I mean, enjoying the process is important, and a lot of people don't enjoy or I should say, not a lot of people don't enjoy the process, because a lot of people do, but a lot of people who don't find success with their nutrition program, who don't find themselves, the people who don't find themselves enjoying it, it's literally just a lens shift that they need, and it's just you just got to go, hey, like I'm gonna eat this for breakfast, like. Well, I guess that's better. Like I'm just gonna eat this up. Like I'm just gonna own this, and it's gonna be so much fun. Just like any other part of your life where you were excited to make progress in.
Yeah.
Like you show up and you get excited to make progress, and then your behavior just kind of naturally flows from that without having to, just discipline yourself and will yourself into existence. Like you're gonna use a little bit of willpower in certain spots, but your whole day shouldn't be a white knuckle. Jaw clenching grind,
miserable over it, right?
To quote unquote stay on diet, that's just not how it should be.
So does that kind of wrap up gluten? It's kind of figure out.
I think the point is that are you allergic to gluten or not?
Right.
I think the point is that there's a bigger lesson there in like how to look at how foods affect your body, right? Like. If your doctor doesn't tell you you're allergic to something, right? Like you're not allergic to it.
Yes.
That doesn't mean you're not a little bit sensitive or a lot bit sensitive to it. But, kind of just like anything else, you go through an exploratory process so that you can learn how to make decisions that work for you. I mean, that's it. And so it's no longer like, is gluten in itself evil? No, gluten is neutral. It's literally just a protein found in certain
I was going to say, you didn't even say what gluten was, but now you just did.
For those who don't know, which most people don't.
Most people don't. They just know the word.
Yeah, So
I didn't know what it was before I got into nutrition.
Yeah, gluten is just a protein found in certain wheats. And you'll find it in other foods because it's got properties that make the texture of the food kind of stretchy and stuff like that. So it can make they'll extract the gluten from wheat and then put it in other processed foods to make the texture more favorable, I guess, or whatever the case is. So that's what gluten is. And so there's a lot of confusion about like our grains. Like a lot of people lump, I guess this is kind of a side note, but maybe I'll just say it real quick. Everybody lumps all grains in with gluten.
Right.
And that's not the case. Like wheat has gluten, oats do not.
Is rice gluten-free?
Rice does not have gluten.
That's a big one we get.
Right, yeah.
And some, just to clarify, some oats do. So you do want to look for gluten-free oats. The way they...
That just means that they weren't processed on the same line as...
But if you truly are gluten-free, right, you have to just look for that.
So oats themselves don't contain gluten.
Yes.
When you see a thing that says gluten-free oats, it means that they were processed on a belt or whatever, on a machine that never had wheat or other gluten products on
that.
That's all that means.
Same as when you're getting lunch meat and you have the gluten-free slicer.
Right.
Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's that. So
yeah, just knowing what gluten is first.
Yeah, knowing what it is first is always helpful.
Right.
Because you can, like, there's barley, I believe doesn't have gluten in it. You know what I mean? Like the pumpernickel bread doesn't have gluten in it.
Got it.
So the specific one I'm thinking of, there's a lot of different breads out there. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but yeah, gluten is the topic itself. Should I go gluten-free is a segue into a much bigger picture that's going to serve you way better, which is, am I sensitive to this food, or does it work for me?
Right.
And how do I know if it works for me? And I can go through this process and start learning about myself and starting to piece together sort of my own plan, which is what we want everybody to do. So a lot of times, like certainly back at the gym, and this applied to fitness and nutrition, but like a new person would come in, they'd be like, so what do you, what's your theory? I'm like, my theory? Yeah, like what do you do? Are you CrossFit and paleo? Are you keto? And I'm like, well, like no, like I'm going to teach you how to exercise in the context of the gym, right? And then in the context of nutrition, like we're going to find what works for you. And, for those who are ready for that, it's like, sweet, that's what I've been looking for, because
I'd like to live in the gray area.
Yeah, I'm tired of these arbitrary rules, right?
Yes.
But then there's a lot of people who just weren't there yet because unfortunately there's just so much dogma around food.
Yes.
And you know what I mean? There's so much like this is the right way, and I'm here to tell you there is no right way.
What's cool about our process, or this process too, and how we've kind of cultivated our own life is we got to make our own rules, right?
Yeah.
Like you get to make your own rules, right? Like if you're hearing out there plant-based is best, and then you go and you're plant-based and you realize it does work for you, awesome, that's best for you. Maybe you realize that's not realistic for myself and my family and my lifestyle. No big deal. Maybe you do go and take gluten out and you're like, I'm feeling amazing. Great. Be gluten-free, but you get to make your rules. But you have to also really educate yourself on the process and what works best for you.
And by the way, like, those are all the parallels. So when we talk about, like, we use fitness and nutrition as a vehicle for a better life, those are all the parallels you can extrapolate out and apply to anything else that you do. You know what I mean? Like, first of all, eliminate the word should from your vocabulary forever. Should I do gluten-free? Should I do CrossFit? Should I deadlift? Should I do kettlebells? No. You shouldn't do anything. You know what I mean? You can pick the path that you want to be on, that you can pick the means that get you to the end that you desire, and pick the means that you enjoy, and pick the the process that you enjoy, and experiment, and don't be afraid to change directions if your life changes, or you know what I mean? And so that's nutrition, right?
Yep.
If paleo worked for you, and then it stopped working for you because you got tired of being so restrictive, don't be afraid to change gears and go do something else.
It's not a big deal.
Right.
Right.
And it's same with anything else out there. So it's this constant revisiting, like what works for you, what doesn't.
Because the only person it impacts is yourself. Right?
Yeah, like-
That's the only person you're
Yeah.
concerned about.
Mhm.
And so many people are worried about what everyone else is going to say.
Well,
If you were a big paleo fan, then all of a sudden you're not paleo, but you talked about it and you owned it and you
Right.
you let everybody know that you were
Right.
paleo, right? Like caveman was the way, and then all of a sudden now you're eating carbohydrates and you're having bread again. Like most people are worried about it. So it's just pick and choose what works for you. Like that's it.
Well, and it's a certain amount of personal responsibility too. Like we want to, the collective we have a tendency for stuff that's big and scary to want to put the onus on somebody else to create the structure for us. Like freedom is scary. Creating your own path is scary, right? So sometimes it's easier to transfer that responsibility to somebody else. This doctor said I should eat this. This doctor said I should eat this. This doctor said this exercise is best. This boss said this career path is best. And we want to put the onus on somebody else for our own destiny, basically. So it's liberating it's scary, but it's also very liberating to just take charge. And yes, it takes more work, but the reward is infinitely more fulfilling.
Yeah.
Again, that's with nutrition and basically everything else.
Well, I was going to say it's so similar to parenting too, right? Like
do not listen to parenting advice from anybody.
Yes, like when you think about that word should, I mean, I can think about it recently. I'm like, should I take the bottle away from mom? I don't know. They're twins and they're going to sleep and it's easier and it's always should. And it's because you read all these things and you hear what your pediatrician says and your doctor, but ultimately you're making that choice, right, for your kids. And you're going to do what fits your life best and their life. And it just really, really connects so well to parenting because you just hear what everybody else is doing and think immediately that's going to work for you or that's what you should do. And no, you got to do what works for you and your kids. Like
that's it. Yeah. So I don't know. How do we wrap it up?
Go and figure out if you like gluten or not.
Yeah.
Right. Figure out how it feels on your body. Right. And know that it's not your weight loss tool.
Right.
It's more, do I feel literally good on the inside out if I have that type of product?
Yeah, so it's determining if it's an actual medical condition or not.
Yep. And then if not, where you sit on the scale of sensitivity
schedule. How much does it affect you? And then go through and do the work to identify how it really affects you in what ways, and then if it's worth it for you. And again, that's personal responsibility, and that extrapolates out to everything. You know what I mean? That process can be slapped on every little piece of your life. Sit back, remove the emotion from it, you know what I mean? And just look at, how is this serving me? And in order to find out how it's serving you, you have to go through a little bit of a process, right? A little bit of detective work, a little bit, and it can seem sort of, I don't know, what's the word? Detail, it can seem sort of just like a lot of work at times.
Yeah, a little tedious.
Tedious, yeah. Thank you. It can seem tedious at times. You know what I mean? But taking the reins back and taking the power back and taking control back, and rather than just making a blanket statement like, I can't have gluten, I think it's better to do that tedious work and understand this is how gluten affects me, and now I get to choose if I have gluten. And again, take that concept out, apply it to all foods. Take that concept out, apply it to your exercise. Take that concept out, apply it to your parenting. Take that concept out, apply it to your career, right? There is no should. It's just, is this serving me? How is this serving me? And I get to do this work, and I get to make this decision for myself. And it's that's pretty much how, using fitness and nutrition as a vehicle for a better life 101.
Right.
It starts with personal responsibility, and it's a pretty scary but also really liberating feeling. So that's I think that's it for the day.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. All right. So if you want to find out more about how we go through this process, how we guide people through this sort of exploratory process, you should check out our 12-week course, the Anti-Diet, antidiet.co, not .com, antidiet.co. Go over there, check it out. If it's something you want to do, click the button. We'll set up a time to talk and see if it's a good fit. All right.
We're gonna go get our gluten pancakes.
Yes, we are. All right. Later.